Manhattan's most luxurious mansion, millionaire Gregory Sullivan gathered businessmen and investors for a night of pure glamour. Amidst crystal glasses and laughter, an international chess grandmaster was introduced as the party's main attraction. Everything seemed perfect until, in the midst of the awkward silence, a skinny 13-year-old boy, the cleaning lady's son, said in a firm voice, "I can play." The hall burst into laughter. Gregory laughed loudest of all, certain it was just a cruel joke. But minutes later, the laughter turned into absolute silence, because every movement that boy made in front of the board revealed a talent that no one could have imagined. And when the last piece fell, everyone was on their feet, in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. In imposing Manhattan, where skyscrapers glittered like glass jewels, one name echoed with weight and authority: Gregory Sullivan. At 50, he owned a financial empire that spanned banks, hotels, and technology companies. His mansion, built in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, reflected not only his fortune but also the ego that sustained it. Imported crystal chandeliers, Italian marble floors, and artwork in every hallway transformed the place into a temple of ostentation. Gregory did nothing haphazardly. Every detail of the house, the parties, and the clothes were calculated to reinforce his image of power. He believed that respect was bought with luxury and that admiration was earned with displays of grandeur. With each event he organized, his reputation as the perfect host strengthened, but so did the silent fear of those who served him. For Gregory, wealth wasn't just comfort, it was a shield against insignificance. He disdained any sign of fragility, viewed compassion as weakness, and treated subordinates like replaceable cogs. Those around him knew that even the slightest mistake could cost him dearly, and few dared contradict him. In the chilly atmosphere of his lavish parties, there was an unspoken rule: everyone must reinforce his authority. Guests smiled reverently, even when they didn't understand his jokes. Staff moved like silent shadows, avoiding his gaze. Gregory was a man accustomed to being the star of each evening, and any unexpected event was seen as a personal affront. And behind this rigid control lurked a deep insecurity, the fear that even a minor detail could tarnish his perfect image. On that particular night, Gregory was preparing yet another exclusive dinner, planned to be remembered as a milestone in his social career. Influential businessmen, international investors, and even a chess grandmaster were confirmed. Everything had been organized with almost military perfection, from the wine selection to the seating arrangement. The millionaire felt invincible, confident that once again his mansion would be the scene of admiration and envy. But unbeknownst to him, it was also about to be the stage for something he could never control: the unexpected revelation of an unlikely talent. And it would be precisely this detail, coming from a boy invisible to his eyes, that would challenge all his arrogance. While Gregory Sullivan shone in the spotlight of Manhattan's elite, elsewhere in the city, life was shaped by silence and sacrifice. Rosa Mitchell, 38, woke before sunrise to face long hours of work. Widowed for almost a decade, she raised her 13-year-old son, Ethan, alone. Her small apartment in a modest neighborhood reflected her daily struggle: peeling walls, simple furniture, and a constant smell of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the warmth of her maternal devotion. Rosa was a cleaning lady at Gregory's mansion, and while the job provided her with basic sustenance, it also brought with it the constant burden of invisibility. To the guests attending the lavish parties, she was nothing more than a shadow, cleaning glasses and polishing floors, nameless, without a story. But for Ethan, his mother was everything. Rosa not only provided food and shelter, but also cultivated values that the boy carried with pride. She spoke to him about dignity, courage, and the power of knowledge, even when money was scarce. While many teenagers sought distraction in screens and games, Ethan spent hours immersed in chess books donated by a small community library. Rosa watched him with tenderness and concern. She saw in her son an extraordinary talent, but feared that the cruel and unequal world would never give him a chance to showcase that gift. Still, she never stopped encouraging him. Whenever he could, he repeated, "What's in your heart and mind, Ethan, no one can take away." That night, Rosa had no choice but to take her son with her to the mansion. There was no one to leave him with, and Gregory's dinner required all the staff to be on high alert. Afraid that her presence would be perceived as a nuisance, she asked Ethan to remain quietly in a discreet corner, with his inseparable notebook of play notes. The boy obeyed, but his eyes shone with curiosity as he watched the guests arrive, impeccably dressed and carrying important conversations. The contrast was stark. On one side, a world of inaccessible luxury. On the other, the simplicity of a boy with dreams bigger than any gilded ballroom. And Rosa, though distressed, had no idea that that night her son would emerge from the shadows to become the center of all attention. From a young age, 13-year-old Ethan Mitchell had an unusual curiosity for chess. The first board he ever saw was made of cardboard, with pieces improvised from bottle caps that his mother, Rosa, collected after work. The boy spent hours creating plays on his own, observing patterns and strategies he learned from used books at the community library. It was as if each move were a secret language understood only by him. While other children played soccer or distracted themselves with video games, Ethan found his true battlefield in the silence of modest homes and yellowed pages. There, in each checkmate scribbled in notebooks, a mind was born that no one could underestimate. Neighbors, when they saw him absorbed in a borrowed board, would laugh. That boy lives in a dream world. But Rosa saw beyond that. She knew the gleam in her son's eyes wasn't of distraction, but of discovery. Often, after exhausting days cleaning Gregory Sullivan's mansion, she would come home to find Ethan awake, drawing new openings and variations. "You should sleep, my son," she would say fondly. But he would reply, without taking his eyes off the pieces, "Each move takes me further, mother." Rosa smiled, proud and fearful at the same time. She recognized that this talent could be her liberation, but she also knew the world would laugh at him before admiring him. That night at the mansion, as he sat waiting in a side chair, Ethan couldn't let go of the worn notebook in which he recorded combinations and tactics. The hall glittered with crystal chandeliers, but for him, the true light lay in the board he envisioned in his mind. He didn't know that in a few hours the game, previously confined to his silent notebooks, would gain an unexpected audience. He couldn't have foreseen that the powerful men before him would witness something extraordinary. But fate, ever relentless, was already moving its own pieces. And every invisible move Ethan had made thus far was about to place him before the greatest prank of his life. At Gregory Sullivan's mansion, every detail of the evening had been carefully considered as if it were a work of art. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light onto tables covered in impeccable linens. Exotic flower arrangements occupied the corners of the dining room, and waiters circulated silently with glasses of sparkling champagne. The air carried the aroma of refined dishes prepared by international chefs. The guests, dressed in tailored suits and evening gowns, chatted in groups, alternating between forced laughter and comments about million-dollar deals. For Gregory, this event was not just a party. It was another opportunity to flaunt power, surround himself with admiration, and feed his ego. Among the employees working discreetly to maintain the evening's perfection was Rosa Mitchell, dressed in a simple blue cleaning uniform. Her steps were quick, her gestures precise, like those of someone who knew a single mistake could cost her her job. Every now and then, her eyes darted to the corner of the room, where 13-year-old Ethan sat silently, his chess notebook on his lap. The boy observed everything curiously, as if each detail were a piece on an invisible board. He saw the calculated expressions of the businessmen, the competitive glances, the smiles that hid their intentions. For him, it was just another game, though he didn't yet know how much he was about to become part of it. In the center of the room, Gregory strode with firm steps, exuding authority. His voice echoed as he welcomed foreign investors and local partners, while proudly displaying the artworks adorning the walls. For him, the party was a spectacle of non-stop luxury, and each guest was an audience for his grandeur. What Gregory didn't imagine was that that very night his attention would be stolen by someone he would never have considered worthy of attention: the cleaning lady's son. Amid the glitter of jewels and the clink of glasses, a game far greater than any million-dollar contract was about to begin. The elegant hubbub of the ballroom fell silent for a moment when the main doors opened to announce the presence of a special guest. A tall man with neatly combed gray hair and a penetrating gaze entered, amidst the curious gazes of those present. He was Anton Volkov, an international chess grandmaster known for accumulating titles and victories in tournaments around the world. The mere fact of having him at this party was a source of pride for Gregory Sullivan. He walked to the center of the room as if carrying the weight of genius, his calm demeanor contrasting with the excited nervousness of the guests. Gregory threw his arms out theatrically, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just about business, but also about celebrating intelligence. That's why I've brought you one of the greatest living minds, Anton Volkov." Applause echoed through the room, some genuine, some just social graces. The millionaire smiled, feeling even more powerful for bringing such a prominent name to his party. For him, this was yet another symbol that money could buy anything, including talent. From the corner of the room, Ethan Mitchell watched silently, his eyes shining as he recognized the great master he'd read so much about in old magazines from the library. It was like seeing a legend come to life before him. As guests approached to greet Volkov, Ethan clutched his notebook tighter, his heart pounding. He had no idea that their paths would soon cross in an unthinkable way. Rosa, noticing her son's intense gaze, felt a shiver. She sensed something beyond imagination might happen that night. Gregory Sullivan strode through the hall like a king displaying his trophy. Each time he introduced Anton Volkov to a guest, he proudly repeated, "This man is proof that genius can also be a spectacle." His eyes sparkled not because of chess itself, but because he was the one with the power to bring an international grandmaster into his mansion. To Gregory, Volkov was nothing more than another status symbol, an intellectual adornment that reinforced the idea that his wealth knew no bounds. He smiled with satisfaction as he heard the murmurs of admiration from those present, as if each word were another medal hanging from his ego. As he toasted glasses of champagne, Gregory didn't miss a chance to make arrogant remarks. "Look, gentlemen, chess is a game of kings, but also of strategy, something we businessmen understand very well." The guests laughed, some genuinely, others just to avoid contradicting him. The atmosphere was like a staged spectacle, and Gregory believed he was in control of every detail. The millionaire felt untouchable, convinced that nothing could break the spell of that evening. However, in the shadows of the ballroom, Ethan Mitchell silently observed every gesture, every word, as if he were watching another invisible chessboard. Rosa, in her blue uniform, collected glasses and plates, hoping the evening would pass without incident. But, unbeknownst to Gregory or the guests, pieces of a much larger game were already being moved. And soon, the millionaire's pride would be put to the test by the one he least expected. After long toasts and pompous speeches, Gregory Sullivan decided to turn Anton Volkov's presence into a spectacle. He drew everyone's attention by gently tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon, the sound echoing throughout the room until the conversations were silenced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said firmly, "this evening will be marked not only by our business dealings, but by the rare opportunity to witness a true master in action." He turned to Volkov with a theatrical smile. "Tell me, Anton, are you willing to show off a bit of your genius?" Volkov inclined his head in agreement, his serene expression contrasting with Gregory's exaggerated enthusiasm. A chessboard was brought in by two attendants and placed in the center of the room, on a polished dark wood table that reflected the light from the chandeliers. The pieces, made of ivory and ebony, seemed to gleam under the curious gaze of the guests. Gregory spread his arms like a conductor before an orchestra. "Who among you will dare challenge a world champion?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Guests laughed nervously, shook their heads, and looked around, but none dared to stand. The scene went on longer than Gregory expected. His expression began to harden at the lack of volunteers. He tried to hide it with laughter, but inside he burned with frustration. "Now, don't tell me everyone here is scared?" he scoffed, trying to provoke someone. But despite the provocation, no one volunteered. The silence was heavy, and the show he'd been planning so hard seemed about to fail. Until, coming from a forgotten corner of the hall, a soft but firm voice cut through the air. "I can play." Eyes turned immediately, and what everyone saw made the entire hall burst into laughter. All eyes turned to the discreet corner of the room, where 13-year-old Ethan Mitchell stood timidly. The notebook was still in his hands, as if it were a fragile shield against the elegant crowd. His voice trembling but full of conviction, he repeated, "I can play." For a moment, the hall remained silent, as if no one was quite sure what they had just heard. Then, almost in unison, laughter broke out. Men in suits laughed out loud, women hid smiles behind champagne glasses, and even waiters looked at each other in disbelief. The idea that a skinny boy, the son of a cleaning lady, would dare to challenge a great master seemed too absurd. Gregory Sullivan laughed the loudest, leaning back in his chair, clapping his hands in pure mockery. "You?" he said with a laugh, his voice echoing through the room. "The cleaning lady's son wants to face Anton Volkov?" Rosa Mitchell felt her blood run cold. His legs felt weak, and for a moment he considered running to his son and dragging him back to the corner before he was humiliated. But something in his gaze paralyzed her. There was a strength in Ethan she'd never seen before, a determined glow that didn't dim even in the face of cruel laughter. He didn't seem intimidated. On the contrary, he stood firm, breathing deeply, as if this moment were the chance he had been waiting for all his life. Rosa put her hands on her apron, trying to hold back the tears that were beginning to form. He knew that one sentence from Gregory was enough to crush his dignity in front of everyone. And yet, the son was there, standing, facing dozens of disbelieving looks. The room vibrated with mockery, but Ethan's heart told him the time had come to show who he really was. Gregory, amused by the boldness, decided to prolong the humiliation. He stood up and announced loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new competitor here, the little prince in the apron." The laughter intensified, echoing between the golden walls of the mansion. The millionaire approached Ethan and, bending down so that his voice could be heard only by him, whispered, "If you want to play, boy, do it in front of everyone." He stood up again and pointed at the board, sneering, "Let's see what the cleaning lady's son can do." Noah walked to the table with firm steps, feeling each laugh as a challenge. And as he sat before the great master, the hall, for the first time, began to fall silent. An unexpected game was about to begin. The sound of laughter echoed through the luxurious hall like a cruel orchestra. Businessmen leaned back in their chairs, slapping their hands on the legs, while ladies covered their lips with crystal glasses to hide their mocking laughter. The scene seemed comical to them. A skinny boy in simple clothes, daring to sit before a great world master. Gregory Sullivan, standing beside the table, laughed loudest of all, relishing the spectacle of humiliation he believed was about to unfold. "Just imagine!" he exclaimed, raising his arms as if he were putting on a show. The cleaning lady's son against Anton Volkov, the champion. The laughter intensified, the sound filling every corner of the room. It was as if the entire elite were united in a single act of contempt. For them, that moment was nothing more than a luxurious anecdote. But for 13-year-old Ethan Mitchell, it was the start of the most important match of his life. Sitting before the ebony and ivory board, Ethan maintained his posture. His eyes roamed the pieces with familiarity, as if this were his territory. Laughter reached his ears, but it didn't penetrate the wall of concentration he had built over the years. He remembered silent nights with his mother, solitary games on makeshift boards, borrowed books and scribbled in them until the pages fell apart. None of that was a joke. There, on each piece, was engraved his story of persistence. While the guests jeered, he prepared himself mentally, anticipating moves, imagining possibilities. It was as if he was already playing, even before the first piece was moved. Ethan didn't need to prove anything to that noisy audience. He just needed to prove to himself that he was ready. Master Anton Volkov, for his part, watched in silence. His expression remained calm, almost enigmatic. He did not join in the laughter, nor did he show disdain. On the contrary, he seemed intrigued by the courage of the boy who had agreed to sit across from him in such a hostile environment. With slow movements, he adjusted his chair and straightened his shirt sleeves, preparing to begin. This gesture, so simple, was enough to silence part of the room. The laughter subsided, replaced by a curious anticipation. Was it just a passing joke? Or did the boy really have something to show? The atmosphere slowly changed, as if everyone, despite their initial disdain, were about to witness something that deviated from that night's script. The silence that had formed in the hall was broken by Anton Volkov's calm voice. With a slight smile, he looked directly at Ethan Mitchell and said, "All right, kid, let's play." The reaction was immediate. Some guests let out new nervous laughs, others frowned, unable to understand why a renowned master would agree to waste time with a teenager. But Volkov didn't seem concerned about the audience's opinion. His gaze was fixed on the boy, as if he recognized a rare spark of courage. As he adjusted the pieces on the ivory and ebony board, the master conveyed a serenity that contrasted with the hustle and bustle around him. Gregory Sullivan, still laughing, motioned for everyone to come closer. "Let the show begin," he announced, as if he were a circus ringmaster about to show off his most unlikely attraction. The buzz grew, and soon a circle of curious eyes surrounded the table. The atmosphere, previously mocking, began to take on an air of anticipation. Ethan sat up straight, trying to control his rapid breathing. His fingers rested lightly on the notebook, as if seeking in it the security that accompanied him in all his solitary games. Inside, his heart was pounding, but his mind remained completely silent, immersed in the possibilities of the board. He had faced opponents before at the community library, but never anyone of this magnitude, and certainly not in front of an audience that expected him to fail. Still, there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. The memory of his mother's voice echoed in his mind. "What's in your heart and mind, Ethan? no one can take away. It was this certainty that gave him the strength to remain firm. With a confident gesture, he touched the starting piece, marking the beginning of the game. And the simple movement was enough to make the laughter diminish even more, replaced by attentive looks. The invisible boy began to gain space in the center of the scene. Anton Volkov, with a serene expression, responded to Ethan's movement. His penetrating gaze was not one of disdain, but of careful analysis. He noticed something different in the boy's posture. It wasn't the look of someone looking to play, but of someone who saw the board as familiar territory. Every second increased the tension in the environment. The guests, previously dispersed, now leaned forward, as if afraid of missing any detail. Gregory, though still smiling, was beginning to feel a strange uneasiness. There was no way that Kid was taking the game seriously, and yet something in Volkov's gaze, watchful, respectful, suggested that perhaps it wasn't just a joke. The luxurious and sparkling hall was transformed into the stage for an unexpected duel, and the real show was just beginning. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath as the first pieces were moved. Ethan Mitchell, 13, began with a simple opening, but executed with precision, without hesitation. The guests looked at each other, some still chuckling softly, others already showing surprise at the boy's firmness. Ahead of him, Anton Volkov observed every detail with attentive eyes, his expression serene, as if he were analyzing more than just moves on the board. It was the look of someone seeking to understand the opponent's mind. Gregory Sullivan, leaning back in his chair, watched the match with a mocking smile, confident that in a few minutes the boy would be crushed. "Come on, master," he exclaimed sarcastically. "Get this game over with." But with each play, Gregory's confidence began to be mixed with a quiet discomfort. There was no nervousness in Ethan's hands. There was only calm, as if he were in his own room, playing against the scribbled pages of his notebook. The following movements increased the tension. Volkov counterattacked skillfully, his hands gliding across the ivory pieces with the elegance of someone who had played thousands of games. But Ethan responded quickly, seeing patterns that escaped the eyes of the guests. People around began to lean in, trying to keep up, but many were lost in the speed at which the pieces were being changed. "He doesn't seem to be improvising," one of the businessmen murmured, his voice thick with surprise. "No, he knows exactly what he's doing," replied another, frowning. The murmur grew, and the easy laughter that had dominated the hall was now turning into whispers of astonishment. Even the waiters, previously invisible, discreetly stopped to watch. Ethan, focused, seemed deaf to everything around him. Each move was calculated, each advance a piece of a larger puzzle he was silently constructing. The contrast was striking. On one side, the great international master, respected in the four corners of the world. On the other, a skinny boy, the son of a cleaning lady, with no coaches or tournaments, just old books and willpower. And yet, they both looked equal before the board. The guests began to feel a collective shiver. Something out of the ordinary was happening. Gregory, sensing the change in atmosphere, frowned. He tried to laugh again, but his laughter sounded forced, unable to erase the seriousness that was beginning to dominate the room. It was as if everyone sensed that the match would not end as Gregory had imagined. The silence grew with each play, heavy, tense, and it was clear that the show was no longer about humiliation, it was about discovery. The luxurious hall, previously filled with laughter, was now plunged into attentive silence. The ivory and ebony pieces moved across the board as if dancing, each move charged with tension. Ethan Mitchell, with a slightly furrowed brow, was surprisingly calm for his 13 years. He not only responded to Anton Volkov's moves, but anticipated them, as if he saw the board 3 moves ahead. The audience, made up of businessmen accustomed to controlling fortunes, leaned over the table, trying to follow each move without fully understanding. The air smelled of nervousness, and even the waiters circulating between champagne glasses discreetly stopped to watch. The growing murmur was no longer of laughter, but of restrained admiration. It was as if everyone was witnessing something they never imagined they would see that night. Gregory Sullivan, standing in the background, felt the attention shift away from him and onto a boy who should have been invisible. And this displacement hurt more than any defeat. Anton Volkov, who had been calm until then, began to show signs of surprise. The master's eyes, accustomed to facing champions, sparkled at the unexpected challenge. He ran his hand over his chin, looking at the boy with a respect that was unspoken but evident with each play. He tried to create a trap with complex movements, believing that the psychological pressure would destabilize the young opponent. But Ethan responded with precision, sacrificing smaller pieces to pave the way for strategies invisible to most viewers. The audience let out a collective murmur as they realized the master had been surprised by an unexpected counterattack. The sound of the pieces clicking against the board seemed louder than the soft music playing in the background. Volkov raised his eyebrows, a faint smile appearing. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath, recognizing the genius before him. And for the first time that night, it wasn't just the master who was playing seriously, it was the invisible boy too. Rosa Mitchell watched from the side of the room, her heart racing. She clutched her apron tightly, tears forming in her eyes. He never imagined seeing his son in the center of a circle of millionaires, facing off against one of the greatest players in the world. Pride and fear mixed inside her, creating a knot that was difficult to bear. Meanwhile, the guests, who had at first been jeering, now leaned forward with expressions of astonishment. Some even stopped holding their cups, fearing they would miss any detail of the match. The mood had changed completely. Arrogance had given way to tension and anticipation. And everyone began to ask themselves the same thing. Would it be possible for that boy to defeat the great master? The game, originally planned to be a cruel joke, was turning into the biggest spectacle of the night. And Ethan's next move could change everything forever. The entire room seemed suspended in time. The glasses in the guests' hands remained motionless. The clinking of cutlery had ceased, and even the background music seemed distant. All eyes were fixed on the ebony and ivory board, where Ethan Mitchell, 13, advanced as if each piece were an extension of his thoughts. On the other side, Anton Volkov, the grandmaster, no longer played out of courtesy, but with genuine intensity. His piercing gaze searched for flaws in the boy, but found only firm answers and unexpected movements. With each play, the collective breathing of the audience quickened, as if everyone was in the game. It was hard to believe that a skinny boy, the son of a cleaning lady, could provoke such suspense in a room full of millionaires. But there he was, maintaining the game with the naturalness of someone who was born for that board. And with each second, his confidence grew, as did his opponent's respect. Gregory Sullivan, standing near the table, could no longer smile as he had before. Her face hardened with each of Ethan's precise movements, and her mind desperately searched for a way to regain control of the night. The millionaire felt that the guests' attention had completely shifted. No one was looking at him anymore, nor at the works of art, nor at the expensive wines. Everything that mattered was concentrated in the hands of a boy he considered invisible. The blood rushed to his face, the feeling of humiliation growing by the minute. "It's just luck, he muttered, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. The truth was, Gregory no longer ran the show, and that loss of power was more unbearable than any financial loss. The pride that sustained him wavered, and the emptiness that grew in his chest was something he had never experienced before. As everyone leaned forward, he silently retreated, as if trying to protect himself from an inevitable blow. Rosa Mitchell, on the sidelines, felt her heart beat like a drum. He looked at his son and saw in him not just the shy boy who had grown up among sacrifices, but a young man ready to face the impossible. She knew Gregory could destroy her dignity with a word, but she also realized that nothing would be able to erase what Ethan had already achieved. Each piece moved was a victory against years of invisibility, each counterattack a silent cry of affirmation. Tears flowed, but she didn't hide them. The guests, sensing his emotion, also became infected. Some murmured praise, others shook their heads in admiration, unable to believe what they saw. The mood in the room had changed. The mockery had turned into absolute suspense. And with each passing second, it became clearer that the night no longer belonged to the arrogant millionaire, but to the cleaning lady's son who defied fate with courage and genius. The entire room seemed to breathe along with each move on the board. 13-year-old Ethan Mitchell's hands glided steadily over the pieces, his piercing gaze fixed on possibilities invisible to the naked eye. On the other side, Anton Volkov narrowed his eyes, finally serious, as if he had forgotten the elegant audience around him. It was just him and the boy, two players connected by a board that had become a battlefield. The master tried a bold sequence, believing he could turn the game around with an unexpected attack. But Ethan, as if foreseeing the future, responded with a sharp move, sacrificing a minor piece to make way for a subtle trap. The guests leaned in, murmuring amongst themselves, some putting their hands to their mouths in sheer astonishment. Gregory Sullivan, red with indignation, could no longer hide his discomfort. Every advance Ethan made was like a stab to her pride, and the tension reached its limit, until the boy looked up and, in a firm voice, said, "Checkmate." The hall exploded in shock. The guests, who had been jeering minutes before, now rose from their chairs in spontaneous applause. The sound echoed through the luxurious space, reverberating off the crystal chandeliers like an undeniable victory. Volkov, instead of getting angry, smiled with satisfaction. He stood up, extended his hand to the boy and said, in a clear voice for all to hear, "This boy is a true prodigy." Ethan shook his master's hand, his heart racing but his face remaining serene. That was not just a victory in chess, but the breaking of an invisible wall that had always separated him from recognition. As the master bowed his head in respect, the guests exchanged incredulous looks. Everyone knew they had witnessed something unique, something that would forever change the way they viewed that boy and his mother. And at the back of the room, Rosa Mitchell let the tears flow freely, proud of every second of that night. Gregory Sullivan, for his part, was paralyzed. The man who never admitted his mistakes saw his party, his prestige and his authority being stolen by someone he didn't even consider worthy of being there. He wanted to speak, laugh, minimize, but no words came to his mouth. The weight of the silence around him crushed him. It was as if the board itself had turned against him, each of Ethan's pieces a reminder that power doesn't lie in wealth alone. And as the applause rang out, Gregory felt small amidst the spectacle that should have been his. The humiliation burned like fire, but at the same time it revealed a truth he could not erase. The boy he had tried to ridicule had won hands down, and nothing would be able to change that. The applause echoed through the luxurious hall like thunderclaps of recognition. In the middle of that scene, Rosa Mitchell, 38, felt her legs weaken, but her heart burst with pride. For years, he watched his son grow up in deprivation, studying chess on improvised boards, scribbling moves in old notebooks. Now, in the eyes of millionaires and international investors, Ethan was no longer invisible. He had shown that talent didn't need the spotlight, just the courage to reveal itself. Tears streamed down Rosa's face, without her trying to hold them back. It was as if every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every shared meal had finally found meaning. She didn't just see a boy in front of a board. He saw the triumph of a lifetime of silent effort. And this triumph made her feel taller than any crystal chandelier in the hall. Ethan, still sitting in front of Master Anton Volkov, glanced discreetly at his mother. The shy smile he gave her felt like an even greater victory than checkmate. It was his way of saying, without words, "We did it." Rosa put her hand to her chest, trying to contain the emotion that was suffocating her. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition from the guests. The simple fact of seeing his son being respected was already the greatest reward he could receive. She knew the road ahead would still be full of challenges, but at that moment, all that mattered was that the world had seen what she had always believed. Her son was special. Ethan, serene, seemed to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. He didn't boast, he didn't seek the spotlight. He just took a deep breath, like someone who had just taken the first step on a long walk. Meanwhile, Gregory Sullivan sat motionless with the untouched cup before him. His eyes roamed the room, watching each guest applaud the boy he had tried to humiliate. The millionaire felt the bitter taste of defeat not only in the game, but in his own image. He, accustomed to controlling narratives and dominating environments, was now just a spectator of other people's triumph. Volkov, for his part, stood beside Ethan, almost like a silent guardian, reinforcing that the victory was no fluke. The master's respect was the definitive proof that the boy's talent was real. And with each passing second, the feeling grew that that night would enter everyone's memory. Not like Gregory's lavish party, but like the night the cleaning lady's son won his dignity before the world. The hall was still ringing with applause when Gregory Sullivan, 50, finally stood up. His face, previously lit by arrogant smiles, was now tense, marked by defeat. He tried to lift the crystal glass to disguise it, but his hand was shaking. The words he was looking for did not come. Only the heavy silence betrayed him. He, accustomed to making rules, had no control over anything that night. The guests no longer looked at him with reverence, but with a mixture of disapproval and disdain. Everything he had planned to display power had turned against him. And ironically, it wasn't a millionaire rival who had defeated him, but a 13-year-old boy, the son of the woman he had never considered worthy of respect. Gregory was facing his greatest humiliation, and there was no erasing what everyone had witnessed. While the millionaire cringed in his own pride, Ethan Mitchell rose from the board with the serenity of someone who had accomplished his mission. He didn't boast, he didn't smile excessively. He simply extended his hand to Volkov, who shook it firmly, bowing his head slightly in respect. The master, before the Manhattan elite, declared, "This boy has a rare talent that deserves to be seen by the world." The hall burst into applause again, and Rosa Mitchell, in the background, could not contain a sob of emotion. She hugged her son tightly, ignoring the luxurious surroundings. At that moment, it didn't matter who was looking at them. What mattered was the silent victory that the two would carry forever. A triumph that was not measured in money, but in dignity and courage. And that night, Ethan stopped being invisible. He had become unforgettable. Leaving the mansion, mother and son walked through the streets of Manhattan with light steps, as if the weight of years of invisibility had finally been lifted from their shoulders. The cold city wind seemed softer, and the bright lights now symbolized possibilities. Rosa held her son's hand proudly, while Ethan carried the old notebook close to his chest, as if it were a trophy. That night would not be remembered for the expensive wines, the artwork, or Gregory's empty speeches. It would be remembered as the night when a boy, against all odds, defeated a master and showed the world that talent doesn't choose a surname. And so, between tears and smiles, mother and son disappeared into the city crowd, carrying with them an unshakable certainty. The future had just opened up before them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any inspiring videos, and, of course, leave a like, because it really helps the channel continue to bring you moving stories like this. Thank you so much for your support.